just so you know, I've spent most of my life as a whitewater kayaker. I've whitewater kayaked everywhere apart from Antarctica, and done some interesting stuff. And I've always been trying to document or film, get even just photos of what I'm doing. But I normally face this challenge that it's hard to get imagery or video footage that actually shows the real scale of what it is that you're in. And also, normally when you are going to get the most interesting footage for people to watch, it's normally the most terrifying when the last thing you want to do is actually pick up a camera. So I guess you
hit the nail on the head.
How do you manage that as a filmmaker?
Oh, mate, that is exactly 100% right. It's, I think the roughest passage we had on that whole 1 year journey on the boat was actually the passage we went from Greenland to Amsterdam through the North Atlantic very late in the season. It was November when we crossed over, and we hit some really crazy storms. But at that point, most of the sailors had got off the boat in Greenland, and it was basically myself and a skeleton crew sailing it across with Clemens, and I was supposed to film and also be first mate on the boat. And it was just like, it's impossible to do it all at the same time, because when you're in these crazy storms that everyone loves to see on camera and it's all very exciting, generally you're so busy trying to make things work and fix things that are broken, or you're sleeping because you've been up the entire night trying to sort of give people support during the storms. And at the same time, the little bit of footage that you do get at the end of it, you look at it and you're like, oh, that is nothing compared to what it was when we're actually looking at it, because the camera never captures the absolute scale of the waves that you see, because the waves that we saw in the North Atlantic and the North Pacific were immense, absolutely like mind-bogglingly huge. But you look at the shots and you're like, they don't look that big at all. I think the wide angle just kind of spreads them out and flattens them all down.
Well, and you were talking about like the boat go surfing down the face of a wave at like 12 knots or 14 knots or something like that a second ago. But in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, how big does that wave have to be to surf a 100-foot boat? Like that's not a wave, that's a tsunami.
Well, usually the waves out that we were sort of experiencing in these areas, they're huge waves, but they're very, like, they've got these long periods to them. So they're very long, big, large like they're kind of mountains. Like you look at the sea and you see a mountain of water coming towards you that's massive, but it's only under absolutely extreme conditions that wave will ever, pick up and break. It usually just kind of comes towards you and the boat will sort of ride over it. But when you've got a swell going in one direction and then the wind is going in the other direction, or you've got a very strong current going in the other direction, those waves get very steep, and that's when it gets properly scary. But most of the waves that we experienced were just these huge mountainous rolling waves that were very impressive to watch, but only a couple of times were they ever properly dangerous. I think most of the time they're just more impressive to see, and you learn after, a few hours in one of those kind of sea states that it's actually not that dangerous, really.
Yeah, it depends on what you call dangerous.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, like, did you have when was the moment you thought this could all go horribly wrong?
Okay, so the moment when there were a few moments where I was concerned, but I always kind of knew that we would come through on the other side. We had lots of contingency plans. So if anything, if we hit a chunk of ice and it hit us too hard and it punctured the hull of the boat, we had this big high pressure hose that was going to pump it out, and then everyone had their jobs on what they were supposed to do at that particular point in time. So I kind of always felt kind of reassured that we had contingency plans in place for a lot of the time. But there was one scenario when we were basically exiting the Northwest Passage. We're up, let me get my map out. We're up in the north of Canada, Basically, it was a place called Peel Sound, which is right up, I think it's 70 something degrees north, but it's near Gyoya-Haven, and then you go up, and then you've got this basically a passage where you go through the islands in the north, in the Arctic region of Canada, and then you can pop out into Baffin Bay, and then you're out of the Northwest Passage and you can go across to Greenland. So it's basically the point of the Northwest Passage. But that whole area was clogged up with ice because it took us so long to get through the passage that the ice had started to form again. And so our exit point was all blocked, and we had this one area that we could get out of. And if we didn't get out of there, we had to winter over, which meant that we will have had to stay on the boat for up to 9 months in the Arctic. And according to the locals, it can get down to negative 60 degrees Celsius up there in the middle of winter. So, and we were not prepared. We didn't have any heating on the boat. We didn't have any hot water on the boat. We didn't have we weren't not going to survive if we had to overwinter up there. I mean, we might have, but it would have been a harrowing experience. But so we had to get through this channel at the end, and the channel was basically the final point of where we had to go. And it's this like tiny little, thin little exit point. It's like a little channel, and it was clogged with ice, and we didn't realize. It also has a very strong current that runs through it, and we basically mowed it in to see how far the ice was going and if we could maybe potentially pop through the other side and then be free of the Northwest Passage. So we kind of nosed in one time. We saw a bit of ice, so we came back out. They're like, oh, we'll nose in one more time and have a look. And we went in, and as we were going in, the current kicked up and kind of grabbed us and started pushing us through this channel. And then we saw the ice and we realized that our exit point was blocked. But as we turned around, we noticed that the current had also brought all the other ice on the other side of us in behind us and had locked us in. And at that point, we had basically the only choice we had was to commit 100% and just basically motor full pelt into the ice and then just lock ourselves into the right position and just let the current rip us through. And and we were basically for many hours, we were just getting ripped through this tiny little channel, it was kind of like a cement mixer of icebergs. And we were getting hit. So we had completely the whim of the current, and the current was going, between 7 and 9 knots. Sometimes it was absolutely ripping, and we were just getting turned around and tumbled in this. And the scary thing was, like 2 weeks before that, a boat had tried that and sunk. And luckily there was a helicopter in the area that managed to save them. But we were there just going, oh my God. And people have died in there before. It was a very, very scary place to be. And we noticed 2 polar bears walking around not too far from the boat. Oh. And at that point, we were sitting there going, there is a very, very good chance we might have to abandon ship in this strait here. So, yeah. And then luckily we just got pushed through the other side. Sorry, that's a spoiler alert for the series, but we're not getting pushed out the other side, and we all survived. But at that point in time, that was when, and we actually had one of the crew members go overboard while we were in that mess as well. So he's very lucky to be alive too. I had the guy by his legs at one point, because when you're locked in the ice like that, you kind of have to hang over the side of the boat with a big pole. And we had these big aluminium poles, and we were basically fending the ice off the side of the boat to try and, I guess, lessen the impact. It was making no difference in the end, but try and lessen the impact on the side of the boat, because we're seeing chunks of paint and concrete getting ripped off the side. And a friend of mine, Neil, he was there and he was fending a bit of ice off next to me, and his ice pole slipped and he went straight over the side, and I grabbed him by his legs and I was dangling him above this ice. And I was like, what do I do here? And I saw that he actually had relatively solid ice below him, and I thought, I'm going to do more bad than good here. So I kind of let him go, and he landed on his feet on a chunk of ice and jumped into the water and swam around the back of the boat and jumped back on. At the time, it didn't feel that intense. Some of the other crew members got very shaken up by that. But for me, I saw him go down. I let him go. I saw him go down, and I saw him jump off, and I saw him swim around the back, and it was all kind of calculated at that point. So I wasn't too shaken up. But I look back in hindsight and I'm like, oh man, like 10 seconds before he fell over, that chunk of ice was grinding and bashing against the side of the hull. And 10 seconds later, that chunk of ice was grinding and bashing against the side of the hull. So I can't imagine how that would have ended if he'd fallen over at any other point in time. So yeah, and we managed to catch it on camera because the other guy who was filming was doing an interview with the captain and just so happened to have Neil in the background as he fell over during this interview. Otherwise, we wouldn't have caught it on camera. But it was quite scary. But that was the one time on the trip that I really genuinely, I guess, feared for our safety. There were a few times that you get nervous and scared, but that time was very genuine.